One of the pillars here at the Mackinac Policy Conference is civility in politics, which is a very interesting concept right now, given a lot of the rancor that's happening around the country and how people feel about their elected officials and what's happening in Washington. So we thought we'd have a good conversation about it with some of our Michigan congressional delegation. And joining me now is Congressman Dave Trott. Congressman Trott, it's good to see you.
Great to be here.
Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, it's always good to see you as well.
Good to see you.
And Congressman Fred Upton, it's good to see you as well. Thanks so much for joining me. And you guys are actually on a panel later on this afternoon on the main stage as part of the program. And I want to ask each one of you, just as kind of an opening question, when they came to you and said, we want you to talk a little bit about civility in politics, I want to get what your reaction in terms of what you actually think that means.
Well, I think it's easy for us to talk about it because we work together on a myriad of issues. So I think our delegation is a pretty bipartisan group, and we try and find issues we can work together on. But that being said, you know, talk is cheap. I mean, we need to come together and actually come up with solutions. And so you can say we're working in a bipartisan way, but, you know, we're not doing it at the moment in Congress on the big issues like health care or immigration or even infrastructure. And so we need to get after solving some of these problems together. So,
Congresswoman, what do you think?
I think it means that we respect each other, that compromise isn't a dirty word. We have an exchange of ideas. And I think when it comes to Michigan issues, we do try to come together on manufacturing. I actually have bills with both of you on different subjects. David and I have been doing a lot of the environmental issues. We've got the Line 5 bill, even as we sit at Mackinac. Right now, we're circulating a letter to the Secretary of State, taking the lead on nuclear waste in the Great Lakes. And I could do a myriad of other things we're doing together. Fred's my mentor on energy and commerce. We have a little disagreement on healthcare, or a big disagreement on healthcare.
I was just going to say, we'll get to how big or little that disagreement is.
But we respect each other. But we're also working on autos, manufacturing. There's a host of things that we're doing together for what's right.
You know, one of the things that I think has always brought our delegation together is a focus on jobs in the economy. And, you know, for a long time, we were dead last. I mean, highest unemployment rate, 1 million people left our state, really worried about the future. And, you know, our focus, whether helping the autos, whether it's the infrastructure, roads and bridges, we're as a delegation going to go up and look at one of the locks up at the Sioux tomorrow. And we know that if we don't get a new lock in place, it threatens not only Michigan, but frankly the rest of the country as well. So what is it that we can work on together? And we found a lot of things where, in fact, we are absolutely unified and have made a difference for all the folks that we represent.
So what is the atmosphere in Washington in terms of how we're perceiving it at home, or how your constituents are perceiving it, and what are they telling you about what they're seeing and what they're hearing?
well, the atmosphere can be best described as a bit dysfunctional at the moment. We've got a lot of investigations going on, Russia, of course. The media really is focused on, you know, kind of a headline a day. The administration hasn't filled a lot of key jobs yet, so we're trying to work on our agenda, but there's an awful lot of distractions, that's for sure.
Distractions. Congresswoman, how do you guess I mean, try to get people's trust back in that government actually works right now?
Well, one of the reasons I was one of the people that predicted that Donald Trump could become president, because I thought there were two things. One, he understood. I think if you're in Michigan, you haven't recovered from 2008, 2009, and what happened to the industry. And that economic anxiety of, could it happen to me again on trade bills, that you see it there. People were worried about their pensions, whether they're going to be able to retire and have a secure and safe retirement. So I think that is one issue that people are really deeply concerned about. And in Washington, right before we came home, people were talking, and I think it's very important. National security needs to be one of our #1 priorities. But the investigations that are going on right now, I do not believe should be partisan. I think we have to follow the facts. I think it's very important. I know for a fact that I was hacked by the Russians. They told me that last summer. We cannot let a foreign government interfere with what is happening, but we have to be two-track. We got to worry about jobs right now and making sure our state stays strong.
Do you feel there is a distraction like that? There is the two-track of what's happening with some of the investigations. James Comey is expected to testify next week.
It's taking the headlines. You know, I'm like, I think a good number of my colleagues. Let's find out what the answers are. Let the investigation take us where it is, where it's going. I supported the the picking of an independent counsel. It's going to probably slow things down a little bit just because the legal issues, is someone going to get immunity, gearing up the staff, who's got power. But at the end of the day, we need to find out what the answer is, and it take as long as it takes. But in the meantime, we've got so many other issues that we have to work on. We got the budget, we got the fiscal year 18, and I think a lot of us were not happy with the Trump budget the way that it came up.
All right, so let's talk about the budget, and specifically, I want to jump in with the Great Lakes restoration funding that went from $300 million to zero.
We're not going to let that happen. So. That's in the Trump budget request. That was actually what he wanted to do with the balance of this fiscal year as well, and we as a delegation said no way. And we're going to be doing the same thing on the fiscal year 18 when it starts October 1st. We got to invest in the future. You look at the view that we have right here at Mackinac. I mean, what a vista that we're looking at now. We want to make sure that there's money for the NIH, National Institutes of Health, that we can find the cures for all these diseases. And again, our whole delegation worked together to make sure that we pass legislation to do that, but now we got to make sure that the money's going to be there and not a cut as the Trump administration proposed. If you're going to invest in the future, you got to, if you want 3% growth, you got to invest in the future, and that's what these bills do.
Congressman Trott, what were some of your concerns about the budget when you saw it come out?
Well, certainly everything Fred said is absolutely correct. The president's budget is really irrelevant. We're going to come up with a budget in the House. The president will support our budget, I predict. But zeroing out the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, what he's doing with NIH, even some of the cuts to Medicaid, it's a real problem. But the underlying problem is we're only dealing with 25% of the budget. 75% of the budget is mandatory spending, and we can't touch that unless we change the underlying policy. So all of the budget discussions, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, are severely compromised by that fact. And we're dealing with $1 trillion out of a $4 trillion budget, and we can't touch the other $3 trillion. And until we get to that problem, we're never going to have any sensible discussion around a budget.
Speaking about sensible discussions, a lot of people are concerned about what's happening with health care and what the next step is going to be now that the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Congresswoman Dingell, let me start with you and say, what are constituents telling you here, especially in Michigan, because we did have the Medicaid expansion, and what are their concerns about going forward, and what do you think is going to happen in the Senate?
Well, my constituents are very loud and very clear, and I have a very interesting district because I have Washtenaw County, which is very liberal, and the downrivers were my first clue how people were really feeling and that fear. People are scared. This is not a war between two parties. This is real people's lives. I go into Starbucks, I go into Panera, and people are coming up to me and they're scared to death that they're not going to be able to get health insurance, that they've got a pre-existing condition of cancer, of high blood pressure, or a child that's got juvenile diabetes, and they're not going to be able to get health care. Seniors, and by the way, we have to stop calling 50 to 64-year-olds seniors. They're not seniors. They are young people. Young people, yes. Are going to have a tax. Now, we did change it after I lost it in caucus one day, and it became the older American tax. But they're paying 5 times more, the aging tax, that's what we call it now, but are paying 5 times more. 23 million people are going to have their insurance ripped away under this bill. I don't even think Republicans think that the bill we saw in the House will be what we ever do as final. But, we need to worry about, we're hurting the most vulnerable. We are hurting the poor, the elderly, and the sick. And we should not be putting stress on them. We should not be frightening. It's not who we are as Americans. It is not our values.
Congressman Upton, how do you respond to that in terms of looking at the vast numbers of people who will not have health insurance, is what they're saying from the budget office?
Well, a couple of things that I focused on. I wanted to make sure that folks with pre-existing illnesses would in fact be covered. I was most concerned at the end a provision was added to the bill that allowed states to waive essential health benefits, which would include pre-existing illnesses. So it was my amendment that I worked with a number of colleagues on to actually add billions of dollars more for high-risk pools to be able to cover those folks should a state decide to do that. But as we look to the future, I hope that the Senate can find a way a path to do a better bill than we did. I look forward to be a constructive force to try and fix the many flaws that Obamacare has. Premiums are likely to go up at predicted 40 to 50% this fall without any fixes. 1 in 3 counties has only one provider. Some states may not have any. We've got to address those things and come back. And I'd like to think we could get some Democrats to vote. We'll see. It's early in the process.
What do you think about some of the changes that should happen in the Senate?
Well, I think the Senate's going to have a hard time getting 50 votes, so hopefully we can get something from the Senate and move forward. But this is the first step. It's a 3-step process. I mean, Secretary Price is working on regulatory reform relating to health care, and then there's still underlying policies we have to revisit. And as far as pre-existing conditions, it was Fred's amendment that put another $8 billion in addition to the $138 billion that's already in there to help make sure that the high-risk pools can be affordable for people with pre-existing conditions. And
but that 130, with all love and due respect, that $138 billion isn't just for high-risk pools. It's to cover much of the cost. And so that $8 billion, and I know you come back at me and tell me that if it's not enough, they'll come back. We wouldn't even have to be looking for money for high-risk pools if we hadn't stripped essential services out of it. And what we all have to do is, and I know you care, but people out there who have pre-existing conditions are now in real danger. And just because they have access to buying insurance doesn't mean that they can afford it.
But the rest of the story is, you know, the Affordable Care Act was collapsing. I talked to so many constituents said, I have an insurance card, but I can't afford to use it. I can't afford my premiums. I can't afford my $10,000 deductible. So, you know, the current solution wasn't working, and it's incumbent on us to try and find a solution that does work. At the end of the day, unless we can lower the cost of health care, no matter what the plan is, it's not going to work.
And that we do need, whatever happens, we've got to be committed to fixing it. Was the Affordable Care Act perfect? No. There are things that have to be fixed in it. I think we're going in the wrong direction right now, but all of us have to be committed to working together to make sure if you live in this country, you've got access to affordable quality health care.
2 more things I want to throw at you quickly before I let you go. One of them is the Paris Climate Accord. We're expected to hear sometime today what the president's decision is. Do you think he ought to pull out of it, Congressman Upton?
Well, I hope we stay in it. This was not quite a treaty, but an accord that shows that, you know, we've actually reduced emissions in this country. It provides for monitoring in China and India, the 2 of the largest emitting countries. We got to stay in it, and I think it'll be a mistake if we withdrew from it.
Congresswoman?
Well, I agree with everything that Fred just said, and we could do all of the environmental pieces of it, but just what it does to the United States standing in the world, to withdraw from such a significant, what it does to our European allies. There are only 2 countries in the world that aren't part of this, Syria and Nicaragua. It's not what you do in a global world.
We actually have a pretty good track record of showing that emissions have come down. So we can show that we've led the way. It's time for China and India to get with the rest of the planet.
Congressman Trott?
I think we should stay in it. I think it probably should be treated as a treaty and go to the Senate for a vote. But I think we should stay in it. And to Debbie's point, I think in terms of our foreign policy, it really puts us in a bad position if we pull out.
Last question, late night tweeting. Should the president put the phone down after 11 p.m.?
I think that'd be a good thing. You know, sort of like Tiger Woods ought to stay home, too, after midnight.
I'm married to a man that I'm trying to get to put down that suit. So, yeah.
He actually has
By the way,
he has a pretty good
great
record.
follow. He has a great follow on Twitter, I will have to say.
Probably not
Please
3 in
give
the
him our
morning,
best.
all right?
What do you think?
I recently said in a speech, I wish the president used Google more than Twitter, and I stand by that.
That's a good answer. All right, Congressman Fred Upton, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, and Congressman Dave Trott, thanks so much for joining me.